Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. This bill is an admission by the national government that they can't be trusted, because all the instruments that this bill introduces are actually available to the government right now. They could use any of the measures that they are legislating for in this bill right now as a government. What they're doing by bringing this bill in is requiring themselves to meet the provisions in this legislation. So they know they can't be trusted to plan ahead, to set levies appropriately, not to overcharge people on their ACC levies. They know they can't be trusted just to do that as a government as a matter of course. So now they're having to legislate to do it. And it's no wonder that the public apparently are overjoyed at this. I don't know where the National Party gets their information about the public being overjoyed. I think that the public probably have absolutely no idea that this legislation is going through. But certainly Phil O'Reilly has said he's pleased, and I bet Phil O'Reilly is pleased because he is probably sick of the organisations, the businesses that he represents being overcharged on ACC levies by this government. So it is an admission by the government that they can't be trusted on ACC levies. So I've heard a lot about how we need to have a levy setting process that takes into account the volatility of the marketplace, the volatility that can impact on ACC's investments. And that is not an argument to be taken lightly. It is an argument that is valid and is worth considering. If our ACC accounts, particularly the work and earners accounts, were only 100% funded, then there might be some validity in the argument that the government is making, because we could see those accounts drop below 100%. We could see them rise up above 100%. The volatility that can occur would certainly be something that we would need to worry about if they were only 100% funded, but they're not. These two accounts are more like 140% funded. Therefore, the volatility that may cause them to go up or down is going to cause them to go down to maybe 120% funded or up over 150% funded. We're not talking about whether or not we have enough money in the bank to meet the full lifetime costs of the claims. We're talking about how overfunded those accounts actually are. So I reject the argument from the National Party that this legislation is required, or even that volatility and the long-term viability of the accounts has not been taken into account by ACC. In fact, members opposite have told the House how we on the Transport and Industrial Relations Select Committee have heard from ACC that when they make their recommendations about where the levies should be set, they take into account the long-term costs and the volatility that can occur over time. That's already happening right now. What I find most bizarre is that they've been trumpeting the fact that the account which is having its levies reduced the most is the motor vehicle account. Now that's actually the one account where we do need to increase the reserves, because the motor vehicle account is barely fully funded. And in fact, the volatility that members opposite have talked about has impacted the motor vehicle account and pulled it back down below 100% funding at times. In fact, it's very rarely been at 100% funding. There's more work that needs to be done on the motor vehicle account. But bizarrely, that's the account where the government is cutting levies most. You might wonder why that is. I think there's a pretty straightforward reason, and it's just pure politics. There's nothing fiscally responsible about this at all. It is pure politics. And that is the fact that most people pay their motor vehicle account through their vehicle registration. So they actually have to go along to the post office and make a payment. They notice that money coming out of their bank account. Whereas the earners account in particular is funded, it comes out of your account before you even see the money. It comes out of your pay before you even see the money. So people don't notice that as readily as they do the motor vehicle account. So this is just pure politics. The government has cut the levy that people will notice the most, even though that is the levy that actually least requires cutting out of all of them. Others probably could be cut a lot more. The work and earners account certainly could be cut more. This government is overcharging workers and employers by $350 million a year. Yet that is not where they make the cuts. They make the cuts where they will make the most political impact, not where they actually make the most sensible and responsible impact. So we've heard a lot about the supposed $4.8 billion hole that existed in ACC some 6 years ago. Well, sir, the fact is that ACC's reserves are invested. And just like every other major investor, ACC suffered from the global financial crisis. And yes, their balance, their accounts fell. Certainly the amount that they had in reserves was much less than they required for full funding. But actually at that point, they'd never met full funding, because the process of achieving full funding was something that was being undertaken by successive governments and had been underway for about 9 years at that point. It was something which was started in 1999 and was carried on. David Bennett says our policy was to remove it, but David Bennett, here are the facts. The process towards full funding carried on right through the entire period that the last Labour government was in government. That was what occurred. David Bennett can say whatever he likes, but he just needs to look at the facts and see that what happened was
I regret that I have to interrupt the member. I did warn Mr Bennett twice. I called him to order twice. He will desist.
Mr Speaker, the member is encouraging me to tell the truth. I'm talking about the facts. I'm talking about straight facts. And those might be a foreign concept to the member over there, but I am talking about the straight facts, sir. So, in 2008, the government seized on, or 2009, the government seized on this supposed hole in the ACC accounts to do what? To push ACC levies up. And there was one purpose for that. It was to make ACC, or it was actually to make the private insurance companies that they wanted to use to privatise the work account and other accounts able to compete with ACC, because those private insurers simply would not have been able to compete with ACC when its levies were set at a reasonable level. Now, the result of shoving up those levies was twofold. One was that we have reached full funding much faster than was originally envisaged by overcharging New Zealanders. The whole idea of the progress towards full funding was that it would be done in a measured fashion that wouldn't overcharge New Zealanders. Now, we've reached full funding, and I note that the removal of the residual levies is one aspect of this legislation, because full funding has been reached far earlier than was ever originally envisaged. The other thing is, of course, is that the government soon realised that this additional income that was coming in was very helpful for them in their attempts to reach a surplus. And so they've maintained their levies at an artificially high level in an effort to reach surplus, which they still have not done. And they're overcharging New Zealanders by $350 million, which is far more than the budget, than the surplus, which is budgeted for in this year's budget. So in the absence of that overcharging of levies for ACC, there would be no budgeted surplus, as unlikely as it is that the government will hit their budgeted surplus, just like they failed to meet it this year. So, sir, there needs to be some honesty from the government about the way they have treated ACC and what's behind this legislation. The truth is, there is nothing in this bill that the government cannot do right now. What they are doing with this bill is demonstrating to business that even if they cannot be trusted as a government to operate ACC appropriately and to set levies appropriately, they're going to put it into legislation. But actually, really, it's smoke and mirrors, because even with this legislation in place, they will still be able to overcharge on ACC levies. So we will support this legislation because it doesn't appear to do any harm, but also because we think that further down the track it is a vehicle through which we can propose amendments which might actually make some real difference. So we're looking forward to the Select Committee process, we're looking forward to the progress of this bill, but in its current state, it ain't going to do much.